Hello and welcome back to coverage here at GP Seattle. I'm Marshall Sutcliffe in the booth with Reed Duke. We're watching a little Legacy today. That's going to be happening all day long, and we're in MTG Red Zone. That means people are going to be trying to make the cut for top 8, make that run. And right now we've got Zach Elsik versus Austin Yost. Now, these are two of the decks that we got a chance to see yesterday, Reed, including four-color Delver, as it's somewhat called. Sometimes people just call it Grixis Delver if it's the one that has a little bit for Deathrite Shaman going on, but otherwise it's Grixis. Other side of the table, Death and Taxes, sort of the Legacy version of a white weenie deck, a disruptive creature-based deck that also is able to apply pressure to your life total while stressing your resources, like your lands and how much you have to pay for your spells.
That's right. This is certainly one of the hallmark matchups of Legacy. Death and Taxes is a deck that's been around for a long time, but really came into its own over the last couple of years. In fact, if I recall correctly, Death and Taxes was the winner of our last individual Legacy Grand Prix back in Las Vegas about 1 year ago. But Death and Taxes is traditionally a deck that preys on Delver strategies, inherent advantages against opposing creature decks, and in particular, just a lot of annoying, disruptive creatures that match up well against the low land count decks with a lot of one-mana spells, like Delver of Secrets. Now, Legacy experts tell me that dynamic has changed a little bit, and that Death and Taxes, it's now matches up a bit more evenly against the four-color Delver decks. Cards like True Name Nemesis are very powerful against Death and Taxes, but in particular, Kolaghan's Command is kind of a beating against both Aether Vial and the Stoneforge Mystic package. Austin Yost playing the four-color Delver deck, he actually does not have any copies of Kolaghan's Command. It's a card you see sometimes in Delver, but a bit more commonly in the bigger four-color Control or Leovold decks.
Yeah, we were calling it a control deck yesterday. It's a little bit hard to pinpoint in Legacy exactly where these archetypes fall sometimes, but certainly the one step bigger than the Delver decks version, but plays a lot of the same cards.
Outside of Kolaghan's Commands, there are a handful of other sideboard cards that we've been seeing over the course of the weekend that play a big role in this matchup, and Austin Yost does have some of those. These are the -1/-1 effects that are very powerful in Legacy right now. Liliana the Last Hope, Marsh Casualties off the sideboard.
Nice one here for Austin Yost, by the way. He transforms that Delver of Secrets, and he also reveals a nice one, a Lightning Bolt, a card that he could easily use to take out one of the disruptive threats from Zach Elsik's side of the table for cheap.
Yeah, in this particular game, both players are developing pretty well. It looked like Zach Elsik had a hand where his mana situation was going to be really comfortable. He had 2 copies of Aether Vial and some lands, but a tiny bit on the light side in terms of action. Meanwhile, Austin Yost has just been on the play with a very, very effective opening. So in a close matchup, Austin being on the play with a good draw seems to be advantaged in this game, but Zach Elsik is going to start having very powerful turns as next turn, for example, he gets to spend 3 mana and activate one or both Aether Vials, and it's only going to get better for him from there. We'll see if the top of his library can be good to him and if he can navigate the situation carefully enough to get back into the game.
This has got to be a big turn here for Zach, right? He has done nothing thus far outside of the Aether Vials, but now he has 2 mana, maybe 3, plus a Vial on 1 and a Vial on 2. I mean, this could be one of those explosive turns where it goes from nothing on board to a real board state, right?
Right. So one way of thinking it is, so far Zach has added no mana worth of relevant spells and permanents to the battlefield. But this turn, after having invested in the 2 Aether Vials, he could spend as much as 6 mana worth of spells or permanents to affect the board.
Interesting interaction here. Austin, I believe that Zach said, "You may go." And I think Austin said, "I'd like to sacrifice my Flooded Strand," but Zach said, "I'm going to respond."
Okay.
We're not talking about...
This year we're going to see Phyrexian Revoker, which that can't name a land. It can't stop the Flooded Strand.
No.
But what it can name is Deathrite Shaman. Since,
right.
as we've mentioned earlier in the broadcast, Deathrite Shaman's abilities, they don't count as mana abilities. They are actually activated abilities that target, and you can shut them down with Phyrexian Revoker.
Interestingly, though, the timing of this would be that the Flooded Strand is actually already in the yard. So the question is just if the Revoker is actually on the battlefield, and it looks like that actually wasn't the Revoker at all. He actually ended up going for the Thalia, so that discussion's not a thing. But the way this works is a little tricky, right, Reed? You say, I want to activate Ether Vial. An ability goes on the stack. If your opponent says, okay, that resolves, things on the battlefield. You don't get to look at it and say, oh, it's going to be a Revoker? Well, then I'll do this or do that. It's just there now.
That's right. So a lot of subtle timing issues in play. You did mention the fact that cracking a fetch land is part of the cost. In other words, sacrificing the land going to the graveyard, it's part of the cost. So there's no way that Zach Elsik can take an action and shut down those Deathrite Shamans before the land hits the graveyard. But in the meantime, things have developed in a fairly mundane way here with Thalia, Guardian of Thraben, sticking onto the battlefield, and Austin Yost now untapping with access to quite a lot of mana. Not going to do anything with it, though.
Do you think Austin saw that Phyrexian Revoker, or do you think that was just us because we have the overhead camera? Because he kind of revealed it, right?
He did see it with Gataxian Probe earlier in the game.
Oh, so he knows anyway. Okay. So he really saw it. There's the Thalia. Card we've actually seen on the battlefield quite a bit this weekend and has done some real damage. You know, when you have a format based around casting 1-mana non-creature spells, Thalia's a real pain.
And I will point out that pretty important dynamic of Karakas being able to protect the Death and Taxes player's own Thalia.
Oh, that's
in
interesting.
other words, if Austin Yost points a removal spell at it, Zach can just go, well, I'll tap my land, put it back in my hand. Soon to hit the battlefield again at instant speed off that Ether Vial on 2 counters.
That's right. Speaking of protecting the creatures for Zach, there's Mother of Runes. Card's nickname is Mom, and that card does an extremely good job of protecting your cards. Now, of course, the caveat being that Zach does need to be able to untap with Mother of Runes on the battlefield. So there is a window here where Austin can use, say, that lightning bolt that he has in his hand to take out a threat. But it's getting a little bit tricky here, and those Ether Vials really throw a wrench in the works if you're sitting in Austin's seat, because so many, you know, there can be Flicker Wisps to save stuff. There's the Karakas that you mentioned already. It gets kind of scary.
Yeah, and this is how Death and Taxes likes to operate. We've talked about its cards at face value. They're not super in-your-face, powerful legacy standout cards. It's a lot of subtlety behind what's going on with the Death and Taxes deck, and a player like Zach Elsik loves the ability to navigate to this type of board position where he has a lot of tools available to him. He can operate a lot at instant speed. His lands are doing things. His creatures have abilities both activated and passive, and there's just a lot he can do to manage the battlefield in the course of the game.
Now we're going to see Phyrexian Revoker almost undoubtedly naming Deathrite Shaman. Austin did get to use them on some capacity, but now they're going to be shut down. And, of course, Mother of Rune's there to protect as well. Oh, yeah, we don't need a piece of paper. We're all over it. Our judges are ready with the label maker. It's so much nicer, you know, for the viewers and for us to be able to just know exactly what was named. DRS, of course, is shorthand for Deathrite Shaman. Staff is doing an excellent job of keeping us in the know. We thank them for that.
You'll notice Zach Elsik's life total getting perilously low here against the 3-2 Insectile Aberration.
Thing is doing work, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, and that Lightning Bolt is still hanging around in hand for Austin, correct? It didn't get exiled or something, did it?
I didn't catch a glimpse of Austin's hand too carefully, but I will tell you that he has both Lightning Bolt and Forked Bolt, which could potentially be a real backbreaker.
Oh, goodness
if
sakes.
he has that one. Forked Bolt, you don't think of it as being quite on par in terms of power level with Lightning Bolt, but it is brutal when you play against a small creature deck like Death and Taxes or Elves. Or a Delver Mirror, for that matter. Zach feels like it's time to put a stop to this Insectile Aberration, so in comes Flicker Wisp. Remember, Mother of Runes still has Summoning Sickness, so... oh, okay, this is not going to be a block. It's just going to be the Flicker Wisp resetting the Delver back to square one.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting play because it effectively fogs the attack for the turn. Also forces Austin to find another instant or sorcery to get that Delver transformed. And then on top of it, if Zach gets to untap with the Mother of Runes, a Flicker Wisp is kind of a perma-blocker for the Insectal Aberration. So a little bit of a longer game plan here from Zach, but I got to mention here, Reed, Austin Yost's life total isn't super high either. It is down to 11, but oh boy, that
here it comes.
Bolt, my goodness
and
sakes.
Not a moment too soon with the Mother of Runes having summoning sickness now, but ready to protect creatures later.
And a True Name Nemesis all in the same turn. Austin Yost says, I'd like my Delver back too. My goodness sakes. That was a game-swinging play.
Absolutely. So you see the way that worked with Forked Bolt taking out Phyrexian Revoker, unlocking the Deathrite Shamans, and then True Name Nemesis, the absolutely back-breaking 3-drop creature coming down after the fact against an opponent at 8 life with no real way to remove that from the battlefield. It's going to put this game on a quick clock.
Oof. Or if Zach can rebuild after that. A devastating 2-for-1 off the back of a Forked Bolt. And he used that open window where he had his Deathrite Shamans back active again to cast True Name Nemesis. Really one of the best threats in Legacy. An extremely difficult one to deal with if you're sitting in Zach's seat. So it looks like Zach has decided, well, I'm going to have to race, I guess. And it's hard to blame him. I mean, does he have any answers for the True Name at all?
In the main deck, usually the way Death and Taxes combats True Name Nemesis is by attacking past it with Sword of Fire and Ice. But that's more of a long-run game plan, and Zach has to very much think on the short term because either player could be dead in the course of 2 turns here.
Take a look at Zach Elsik, of course, kind of made his name on the professional Magic scene by winning GP Oklahoma City with Lantern Control before Lantern Control was a known quantity in Modern. But Zach's shown a wide range when it comes to choosing what decks he wants to play. And
I'm a big fan of Zach Elsik, definitely a Magic player with personality. You like to see people that can brew and think outside the box. Zach Elsik certainly fits that bill.
And he's kind of going off here. This is really cool. He played Recruiter of the Guard, got a Flicker Wisp, played the Flicker Wisp now, and he's going to go search up Phyrexian Revoker, so he may be able to stem the bleeding at least on the Deathrite Shamans. True Name Nemesis is still going to be there and annoying, but this board has gotten really nice here for Zach as well. Look at that, 6 power in the air.
So we moved through that fairly quickly, but what happened was Zach tapped 3 mana, cast Recruiter of the Guard, searched for Flicker Wisp, used the Ether Vial to put that into play and blink the Recruiter of the Guard. Then when it came back on his own end step, he searched for Phyrexian Revoker, and it looks like here, there's a flurry of action in the upkeep where Revoker is going to come in and name Deathrite Shaman, and Rishadan Port is going to tap down one of Yost's lands.
So there was, I assume, no targets for Deathrite Shaman, either lands or instants or sorceries in graveyard, so there was a window there for Zach to get that Revoker down where they couldn't do anything. And he took advantage of it. Now there's a Lightning Bolt in the graveyard, of course.
Yeah, Austin Yost points Lightning Bolt right at Zach Elsik, then transforms Delver off of a Force of Will, I believe. Here we
still
have
would leave him a little short on lethal, right?
Right, because the Flicker Wisp can block the Insectile Aberration. We know True Name can get through. There's no question about that. But what else is going to happen here?
This is a really sweet matchup, by the way.
It's a great matchup. It's
yeah.
One of the hallmark matchups of Legacy and a really fun, challenging one for the players to navigate.
So Zach's going to trade off here for the Insectile Aberration, but does drop down to just 2 life as Austin Yost calmly passes the turn back to Zach. Zach has to kill Austin this turn, realistically.
So he'll be looking for probably an equipment is going to be his best bet here. If he can put that on a flying creature, something like an Umezawa's Jitte, Sword of Fire and Ice can be a little too challenging to cast because of his own Thalia.
He is top decking, so this card has to be the one that actually gets Austin dead right now. Else that True Name Nemesis is going to finish off Zach Elsik here in game number 1 next turn. Yeah, that is a non-lethal attack from Zach. Still not lethal.
What Elsik could have is a Swords to Plowshares to target his own creature and get up above 3 life. But it
looks like Rashadenport's going to tap
it.
down a C in combat, and then Zach says, yep, you got me. And that is Austin Yost picking up game number 1. A good fight there from both players, but ultimately it really did come back to that one turn. Fork Bolt into True Name Nemesis, and all of a sudden Zach, who had, I'll say it, he had productive turns after that. He just never could quite catch back up.
That one was down to the wire. Austin Yost with the fast start. Zach Elsik really putting together some big turns in the mid-game on the back of his 2 Ether Vials.
Yeah.
And Recruiter of the Guard being flickered back and forth. But it just wasn't quite enough. True Name Nemesis putting such a firm clock on the game. And Zach Elsik just being a tiny bit short, probably 2 points of life short of stabilizing and turning things around.
How would you rate that that draw overall from Zach's perspective? Was that, because we noticed he didn't do a whole lot in the really early stages, just the Ether Vials, but he wasn't vialing anything in until about turn 3, and then he was kind of chugging along after that.
I would say it was an above-average draw. I think if you're a Death and Taxes player, you would happily take that one every time. You have all your mana set. You have Ether Vial on turn 1. You have value lands with Caracas and Rishadan Port, and you have a little bit of action. It certainly wasn't perfect. You didn't have Swords to Plowshares. He was a little bit heavy on mana and a little bit light on action. He didn't find Stoneforge Mystic, though he could have chosen to do so with Recruiter of the Guard later in the game. So I would say, I'm not mulliganing, but it wasn't perfect either. The biggest factor in that game was just that Zach Elsik lost the die roll, and Austin Yost had a really good draw on the play.
Okay. Man, that Forked Bolt, boy. He runs one of those in the main deck.
Yep, but
you can see why.
You put one of a card in your deck, you're allowed to draw it. That's how these things work.
Yeah, and I mean, it is interesting to note that, you can see why, right? Like, what would be one of the reasons you'd run one of them? Well, it could just be sort of your 5th lightning bolt. But also, you could also have it be in a matchup where that it can spike in this incredibly high value way, and that's what happened here. And I'm sure it's pretty good in the mirror, too. You can kill Delvers and even Deathrite Shamans and stuff.
I think that's exactly what it is. These Delver players have identified that they really want access to 5 ways to kill a turn 1 Delver or Deathrite Shaman.
Mm-hmm.
You know that your 5th best burn spell, it's coming out when you play against Sneak and Show or when you play against Storm. So you might as well choose one that's super potent in the spots where you do want it. And boy, was it potent in that game against Zach Elsik.
That was a beating. Players are shuffling up now. We're in MTG Red Zone here at GP Seattle. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Marshall Sutcliffe in the booth with Reed Duke. We're covering Legacy today. We're going to be giving away a trophy, in fact. And, these are a huge deal. We don't get to see Legacy that often at the GP level. And when it does pop around, I'll tell you what, the Legacy community shows out in force. And given that there's not that many individual Legacy GPs, each of these trophies is highly coveted. They really kind of tend to stand out. Now, the cool part about Legacy for this year, though, is we have had an emphasis on team play. And with the team trios constructed format, Legacy is one of the seats. So we actually get to see quite a bit more Legacy this year than we normally would. But still, these individual GPs are a real highlight. All right, players are examining opening hands, and we're just about ready for game number 2. These players are 8-2. One thing to keep in mind, by the way, is if you are one of these players sitting here, I mean, this is effectively an elimination match as far as top 8's concerned. That's going to be on the players' minds.
Yes, it is. We're in MTG Red Zone, which means we're right in the thick of things. We're in the heat of day 2 here, where players are jockeying for position and answering the question of whether they're going to be major players in the tournament, playing for a possible top 8 berth, or whether they're going to fall by the wayside.
So 3 more lands and another Ether Vial in hand here for Elsik. He also has a Mother of Runes.
Very similar to the way I described his draw last game. You're not going to mulligan turn 1 Ether Vial is the best thing your deck can do. You have, your deck can use extra lands, and the fact that many of your lands are value lands is something you can appreciate. But, certainly you would not choose to have 6 mana sources and one business card. You would rather have a cleaner mix, like 4 mana sources and 3 business cards. We'll see if top of his library can fix that distribution a little bit.
Interesting interaction here as well. He does have Rishadan Port. He actually has multiple of those in his opening hand, but a Flooded Strand on the other side from Nass and Yost kind of delays that effect if that was Zach's plan.
Yost with a nice hand of his own. He's got a lot of cantrips, a lot of ways to smooth his draw, and he's got to be really happy to not see Thalia, Guardian of Thraben, with that Gitaxian Probe. When you play matchups like this where both players have Wastelands and potentially Daze from the 4-color Delver player, I think you're pretty happy when you look at your opening hand and you say, okay, at least I'm not going to get mana screwed. That's definitely step number 1. While there are myriad ways that these matchups can play out and be determined, the most direct and potentially the one that feels the worst, the most direct way is just for one player to not be able to cast their spells.
So 2 vials going again for Zach Elsik. We know how powerful that can be. He is going to need to find some firepower to make those work. His hand was a bit creature-like to open up. But of note, multiple Rishadan Ports. He could use those to slow down us and Yost significantly and then start leveraging those vials later on. You see that kind of interaction that we don't see that often, but, a Rishadan Port's a card that works really well with Ether Vial because you get to keep your opponent off of mana while still developing your board at the same time. It's kind of a nice 1-2 punch.
That's a real classic strategy in Legacy. You see it in Death and Taxes, old-fashioned decks like Merfolk, and even BDM and Adam covered Goblins last round. But the recipe of using Ether Vial to develop your board while using Wasteland and Rishadan Port to lock out the opponent's mana is one that's been very effective for a very long time in Legacy.
Let's see what's going on now. A little bit more action. There's a Phyrexian Revoker, still the Mother Runes in hand. Boy, he did actually find a Wasteland as well.
This is an interesting turn, Marshall, because Austin Yost, you saw him deliberating for quite a long time there over his hand of 8 cards, thinking about not just what spells he might cast, but his land drops. He knows Mother of Runes is likely to come at the end of the turn, and he made the calculated decision not to hold up his Lightning Bolt, but to allow the Mother of Runes to come active, which is going to really change the texture of the game.
Yeah, and he could have both of his lands handled here by his next upkeep. One of them could get Wastelanded, the other one could get Rishadan Ported pretty easily from Elsik, leaving perhaps Austin with just 1 mana source. Now, we say just 1 mana source, but this is Legacy. You can do a lot with 1 mana, but still, look at that. Upkeep, tap your Volcanic, and start to see the strength of the keep here from Zach Elsik. It looks like Austin feels compelled to use Brainstorm here while the Brainstorming's good.
Yeah, he wants to spend his mana, especially with the young Pyromancer out, just being able to churn through his library while making tokens is a great way to get ahead in this game. But yeah, just to revisit that last turn, I think like a really basic level 1 play for Austin Yost would have been to set aside a red mana and say, okay, I'm going to leave up Lightning Bolt for Mother of Runes. But he had seen Zach Elsik's hand. He had seen the number of lands and the amount of disruption that Zach could inflict upon his own mana base. And I think his conclusion was, you know what? if I do nothing and Zach does nothing and he keeps making his land drops in the form of these super powerful wastelands and Rishadan ports and ticking up his ether vials, that holding pattern is not going to benefit me. So he chose to play out Young Pyromancer and push the action himself, even though it meant Zach being able to resolve and untap with Mother of Runes.
Oh, here's a card that we saw used to great effect earlier.
Cabal Therapy,
That's
one of the great cards of Legacy and one of the most fun ones, making for really, really challenging and interesting situations.
I was going to say, you're a sick man, Reed. This is how you have fun. Cabal Therapy, picking cards. Now, Austin, of course, really leveraging some of the cards in his deck, like Gitaxian Probe and now a Young Pyromancer, to make Cabal Therapy look fantastic, right?
Right. Cabal Therapy at face value, it's sort of a role player card. You would think of it for a creature deck like, say, Elves, bringing in against a combo deck as a sideboard card. But when you pair it with those two cards you just mentioned, Gitaxian Probe and Young Pyromancer, it actually makes for a super powerful disruptive engine that you can potentially put right into your main deck and is a real reason why these Grixis and 4-color Delver strategies perform as well as they do.
Yeah, Cabal Therapy is really one of the most interesting cards in the format, though I have to say, there for Austin Yost, it didn't really work out great. Zach's vials lined up kind of perfectly for his hand, and he just vialed in all of his creatures, and there was just a land left over. One more Rishadan port, so the therapy wasn't able to actually...
Yep, that is a risk of therapy, though it's worth noting that it wasn't a guessing problem on the Austin Yost side. It would have been the same outcome if it had been a Thoughtseize or a Duress or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Now, did we just see the Phyrexian Revoker attack there?
I suppose it did attack, and that's because of Mother of Runes being able to give it protection from red.
Mm-hmm.
And here you're really seeing Mother of Runes able to dominate the game. It's not just for protecting your hate pieces against a combo deck, it's also for dominating combat against an opposing creature deck. Mother of Runes just one of the most powerful cheap creatures ever printed, in my estimation.
Card's insanely good. There's Ancient Grudge targeting Ether Vial. Interestingly, the one on 2, not the one on 3. But the mana issues that Zach is imposing on Austin are definitely keeping him to about one spell a turn here. Oh, interesting. He's going to fight fire with fire. Here's Wasteland for your Rishadan port.
Yeah, and I don't think it's that Austin is happy trading lands there. I think he's using that to protect his colored sources of mana.
He still has that Lightning Bolt in his hand, but double Mother of Runes is going to be extremely difficult for Austin to actually get a Lightning Bolt off on a creature. You can see that Zach Elsik preemptively named Liliana the Last Hope.
Wow, now that's some forethought. That is a card that going into this tournament I wouldn't have picked as being very ubiquitous, that players are preemptively naming with Phyrexian Revoker and Pithing Needle, but it has shown up in as a one of in almost all of the sideboards of the Delver and 4-color players that we've seen on camera. Just a bit of an innocuous card that's really overperformed expectations. It does everything you need to do, picking off some of these cheap but important creatures in the format and rebuying your powerful stuff like Snapcaster Mage, True Name Nemesis, whatever it might be.
By the way, Austin did find a way to take out one of the opposing threats that Mother of Runes could not interact with, and that's Diabolic Edict. Ultimately, it was the Phyrexian Revoker that died, as that was considered the worst by Zach, but still leaves multiple Mother of Runes on the battlefield, but nothing to protect at the moment. Still a little bit action light here for Zach. He just has a land in hand. Needs to find some spells.
The good news is he's in prime position to take advantage of almost anything he would draw. There's not that many basic planes in the Death and Taxes deck, and what I mean by that is many of the mana sources do other things like Rishadan Port, Wasteland. Even Caracas would be a nice setup for a potential Thalia that Zach might draw later, but the fact that he has his mana and his Ether Vial and the fact that his deck contains a lot of colorless value lands puts him in a good position to be top decking from here.
Austin, I think, likes his position as far as top decking goes as well. He has Ponders and Brainstorms in his deck.
And he's actually picked up a pair of Lightning Bolts, which means that he can either go aggressively right after Zach Elsik's life total, or he can try to set up a situation where if one of those Mother of Runes gets tapped, he can point 2 burn spells and actually get some traction on the board and take out one of those persistent creatures.
Right now he's been able to develop a lot of these elemental tokens and may just be able to go wide.
Here we see a Delve coming, especially a Gurmag Angler. That Ancient Grudge still in the graveyard. You see Austin set that aside. That's the one I'm definitely not delving away.
Yeah. And there it is, Gurmag Angler. Now, Mother of Runes does a fantastic job against Gurmag Angler, but you mentioned the Lightning Bolt situation could start to get a little bit awkward. Three of a kind, Mother of Runes.
Oh man, there's a pretty unique sideboard card in Zach Elsik's deck that would just be as good as gold in this situation. You want to know what it is?
Yeah, what is it?
Cataclysm.
Cataclysm in his board?
That's a 4-mana sorcery that effectively says each player gets to keep 1 card of each type. 1 creature, 1 land, 1 artifact. So this is a perfect card for the Death and Taxes deck, as it does play a wide range of very impactful permanents and doesn't necessarily need a lot of lands to operate. But if he could draw this card, I don't even know if he sideboarded it in. He may not have, but it would be a really good answer to Young Pyromancer, and leaving himself with an Ether Vial and a Mother of Runes would still let him operate about as well as he needs to.
All right, while we have a second, quick strategy question. Which creature would you keep if you're Austin? Young Pyromancer or the Big Fish?
Well, I suppose it depends a bit on his hand. And also on what land you decide to keep. But, I mean, if you keep Gurmag Angler, you're going to force Zach Elsik to probably block and give the Mother of Runes protection, so just 1 Lightning Bolt can break that pattern. But, for example, if his hand had a lot of Brainstorms and Ponders, it might be worthwhile to rebuild off Young Pyromancer.
There is a Lightning Bolt. This one is going upstairs. You take 3. Oh no, our old friend, the Forked Bolt, is revealed.
And I think that puts Austin's burn count up to, he did use a Lightning Bolt, so only up to 5, but I mean, just making Zach Elsik tap 2 of these Mother of Runes, that's -2 blockers. Last one's going to have to block the Gurmag Angler, and 9, 10 damage going to get through.
Well, there's a Swords to Plowshares. He used that on the Insectal Aberration, and then he gets to soak up the hit from the Gurmag Angler. So how much is he actually taking here? 5?
Taking 5 there. I'm a little surprised that Austin didn't send the Young Pyromancer itself,
as the Gurmag Angler was almost a forced block.
Right.
It's a dinner party over at Zach's house. The whole neighborhood's here. 4 Mother of Runes on the battlefield somehow. I've never even seen that. I don't know if it's going to be enough, though. Zach's at 7. He can kill the Pyromancer. Oh, but Austin shows him the Lightning Bolt once Zach blocks, and that means that lethal is getting through. Even 4 Mother of Runes, not enough to save Zach, and that is 2-0 victory in favor of Austin Yost. He's going to keep his top 8 dreams alive at 9-2. Zach Elsik, well, he's going to have to settle for fighting it out for pro points and a strong cash finish. Nothing to shake at, but still, it's going to be a little bummed to not be able to top 8 the tournament realistically from this point. And welcome back to the booth here at GP Seattle. I'm Marshall Cycliffe. That's Ray Duke. Thanks so much for joining us. We've got Legacy here, and this is, realistically, this is the oldest format that we show at the Premier Play level, at the GP level. And these are special events because we don't get to show them all the time.
Yeah, Legacy is a great format. I really enjoyed watching that particular match between Death and Taxes and 4-Color Delver. As I mentioned, one of the more important and interesting matchups in Legacy, and we really got to see both decks do their thing. What I think made the difference in Game 2 there was really the card selection of the Delver deck, and it's no secret that Brainstorm and Ponder are fantastic cards in Legacy that give you a huge advantage. But what happened there was we played a pretty long game where Zach Elsik, playing a mono white deck, was at the mercy of whatever cards came off the top of his library. And you know what? They didn't really come for him. He had a below average draw over the course of many turns, whereas Austin Yost was not leaving it to chance. He was sculpting the top of his library every turn with Brainstorm and Ponder, and even though if you look at the way the cards match up and the way the games can often play out, Death and Taxes has a fine, if not favorable, matchup against Delver. It is that fact that you leave a little bit of it to chance with issuing Brainstorm and Ponder that can punish you.
Sure. Hey, it sounds like we've got Austin Yost down in the feature match area for a quick word. Austin, Marshall, and Reed in the booth, congratulations. Nice victory there.
Thank you so much.
So, Forked Bolt?
Yeah, there's only one.
Oh, my goodness. You only needed one in that first game. What a blowout that was for you.
Yeah, that was a good one. I was a little worried about trying to trick him into putting that Flicker Wisp into play before I had to use it. So
what does this matchup come down to from your perspective? I'm sure that you've had a chance to play against Death and Taxes a few times. What is the matchup all about?
For me, it feels like Game 1 a lot has to do with whether or not you're drawing Dazes and Force of Wills versus Aether Vials, and if you can find your removal when it matters, that's really where you can steal the Game 1s. Mm-hmm. Post-board, I didn't draw it there, but you saw he revoked Liliana the Last Hope, which has really been an all-star for me when I've been playing it.
Yeah, Reed, you were surprised a little bit, but also we have seen that card be really good.
It's true. That's a bit of a sleeper card in Legacy, but a lot of players playing it, often just a one-of in the sideboard, but it has been pulling a lot of weight. I'm glad you brought that card up. What are some of the cool things it's done for you so far this weekend?
So far, actually, it's only gotten Deathrite Shaman, or Phyrexian Revoker, so I haven't actually gotten to use it against anything. But in my testing, it's dominated all the games I've played it in. It kind of just forces them to, you can definitely get in spots like that last game where they have multiple moms on the table, but having a way to make them activate mom every turn can definitely turn it in your favor.
Now, have you ever faced down 4 copies of Mother of Runes before? It was crazy.
Not today, although I think I was a little happy to see that, considering I had the Pyromancer, so I was happy to have moms instead of having removal or anything like that.
Yeah, for sure.
Austin, I'd like to ask you about what I thought was the most challenging turn of that game 2 was your second turn. You drew your card, and you had 8 cards, thinking for a long time before you even made your land drop, and you eventually decided on casting Young Pyromancer. But can you walk us through your thought process from that turn, if you remember clearly enough?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember what I drew for the turn.
You had a number of cantrips, you had a Wasteland, you had a Lightning Bolt, so definitely a lot to think about on that turn.
I think I was trying to think about whether or not it was going to be important for me to either get the Pyromancer online and get the token off the probe that turn, or if it was more important for me to waste his port so I could free up my mana over the game. But I decided, since I had another fetch land and another Wasteland in my hand, and he had a mom, so I felt like it was more important for me to get a board presence and try and get a bunch of tokens before he could get anything else that he needed to protect.
Well, Young Pyromancer certainly carried a lot of weight. His draw was slow. He couldn't really pressure you, and you were just able to churn through your deck and make 10 tokens over the course of that game?
Yeah. All the cantrips there really helped. I got to shuffle away the Liliana he revokered, so the revoker didn't actually have much of an impact. So just Brainstorm and Pyromancer being really powerful.
Well, great job, Austin. Another win for you. You are X-2, so if you can keep up this winning ways, we might just see you in the top 8. Good luck with the rest of your tournament.
Thank you.
Great stuff from Austin down there. Clearly a specialist. You can tell that this isn't the first time he's thought about these things with the matchup. And you see that a lot with Legacy. People get really into it.
Yeah, I like to hear when somebody talks about their one-of sideboard card coming up a lot in testing. That means they really put the hours in. They really know everything inside and out. And, those one-of cards make the difference there. We saw Forked Bolt being a big deal. Talked about Liliana the Last Hope, but it's all about subtlety.
That's right. All right, well, we're going to take a short commercial break. When we come back, we'll have Time Walk Magic here from Seattle. Don't go anywhere. here at GPC. I'm Marshall Sutcliffe, and I like Magic. That's Reed Duke. You like it too, right?
I like Magic
well,
too.
Let's watch some of it. We've got Time Walk lined up for you, and oh boy, these are two decks, at least for Reed and I, that we haven't had in the feature match area. Storm versus Mono Red Prison?
Yeah.
Who's in for that? Let's sit down and watch Time Walk right now. This is game number 1 between Shota Takao. He's the one who's on the Mono Red Prison deck and kicking things off with a Chalice for 1. Michael Reed is on Storm, and I think a Chalice for 1 is going to be pretty problematic here for the Storm deck. Cantrips no more.
Yeah, that's huge. That's exactly what Shota Takao wants against Storm in particular. He has a lot of cards that are not going to be super effective against a fast combo deck with a lot of artifact mana. You think of Blood Moon, Ensnaring Bridge being some of the hallmark cards of Mono Red Prison. They're not very effective against Storm, but as you said, Chalice the Void on 1 is.
Is that game? I mean, it's never just game, but I mean, did his win percentage just fall by 40% or something? Like, is he a 10%er now?
It's a tricky question because it just depends a lot on the texture of Michael Reed's hand. Storm doesn't technically need any 1-mana spells to go off. If you just have Lion's Eye Diamonds and Infernal Tutors, that's good enough. That's all you need, but it does mean that he's going to be unable to cantrip, and you see him just casting a Brainstorm and just running into the Chalice. Sort of a chump check there to making sure Shota's gonna hit his trigger. He does.
Yeah, I don't think that Brainstorm's doing anything other than that.
But also not be just a gambit there. It might be that Michael Reed wants to fill his graveyard for the purposes of something like Cabal Ritual.
Well, you're right. Get that threshold going. There's a Cabal Therapy, but so far Michael Reed 0 for 3 on resolving spells.
And this is great. We're just getting to see the Mono Red Prison do exactly its thing, which is to invest extra resources into speed and single very potent cards. Like
you mean like Simian Spirit Guide?
Well,
oh man, Shota got you good.
That's not exactly one of the single potent cards. It's more like one of the invest resources cards.
That was great.
Shota's going to win this game on Chalice of the Void for 1 and Chandra. He doesn't really need to cast anything else besides those 2 spells.
He drew another Simian Spirit Guide. More super potent stuff here from Shota Takao. He's going to chip away with the Spirit Guides, but like you said, it's the Chandra that's going to actually win him the game here. This is really interesting. This is so different than the match that we watched prior, which was effectively a creature matchup.
Now it really is. There's no fair magic going on here. It's Michael Reed trying to bypass everything that Shota's doing and win the game directly, and Shota trying to play single cards that invalidate whole swaths of Michael Reed's deck. Now, based on the battlefield, this looks really bad for Michael Reed, but as I mentioned, if he has the right configuration of cards, namely Lion's Eye Diamonds and Infernal Tutors, he can still combo off in spite of this Chalice of the Void.
Now, one thing I want to ask you, Reed. So you're sitting in Shota Takao's seat. So you're thrilled, right? Your game plan came together. Your opponent's just ramming spells in a Chalice just to get cards in their graveyard. Do you know what Michael's playing at this point?
Well, he should have a hint because Cabal Therapy and Preordain, while they're both commonly played legacy cards, they're not universal. So those are both cards that give you small hints about what your opponent might be playing, and seeing them together does usually narrow it down to Storm being one of the foremost options.
Okay.
I mean, you could be playing against a Delver deck where the player has both made the niche decision of main deck and Cabal Therapy and wanted to play a 13th cantrip in a one of Preordain, but that's not as likely as it just being a Storm combo deck.
Yeah, they also would have had to have no
baby
this whole game. Well, this game is ending very, 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 very quickly. That was an ultimate from Chandra Torch of Defiance.
Followed by a Fiery Confluence, which I think could combine for 11 damage directly to the player.
Oh, man. I was going to start calling this Ape Tribal, but I guess it wasn't.
So now we're seeing the downside of the Mono Red Prison deck, which is that you have to mulligan a lot of your opening hands, Shota down to 5 cards, and getting Cabal Therapied for one of them right off the bat.
Yeah, not great. Now, one interesting thing about Cabal Therapy, by the way, Reed, we should mention in the Storm deck, do they flash it back?
It's not in
just
game one.
So strong because they know exactly the cards that they need to get rid of.
There's that, and also the fact that Storm plays with Cabal Therapy and Duress, so a high chance of being able to see the opponent's hand. But you'll see a lot of these games where the only thing that matters is clearing the way through a possible force of will. So if you don't care about very many cards in the format, then guessing doesn't become much of a problem, as you can just name the one card that's going to stop you.
This is really interesting because, so you and I both loved the matchup we saw this round for our live feature, right? We saw Death and Taxes versus a Delver deck, and that was great. Now, I was excited to see Mono Red Prison and Storm because they're so different from those type of things. I don't think I would want to watch this matchup every round of the tournament because it's so non-interactive. But we're getting a real showcase here because Shota effectively won the game on turn 1. And now Michael Reed is going off, what is this, turn 2?
Yeah, turn 2. Turn 1, discard. Turn 2, let's go for it. And here we have an exciting moment with Ad Nauseam. Ad Nauseam is not what I like to call a definitive kill. It's not a foregone conclusion that he wins the game, as it hypothetically would be possible to stack your deck in a way where you take too much damage and can't win. But realistically, he's well over 99% to win the game at 20 life against no disruption. Okay, so I haven't been keeping careful count of his life total here, but it looks like he both took a lot of damage and probably found what he needs to win the game.
About 15. It was 16 cards.
16 cards.
Yeah, he's got 4 black mana floating in the storm count of 5 right now.
And you will note that
those are petals, right?
Those are Lotus Petals.
Yeah.
Michael Reed discarded Tendrils of Agony to his Lion's Eye Diamond earlier, so if he wants to win the game this turn, rather than just putting a bunch of Goblin tokens into play via Empty the Warrens, he's going to need to find Past in Flames for his one of Tendrils.
Wow, he has this thing foiled out. We don't need to adjust our cameras or something from that reflection. Look at that deck. Shota Takao can do nothing but sit here and await his fate. Hope that Michael Reed fizzles.
So the Storm counter up to a fairly astronomical level. That's not a concern here. It's just whether Michael Reed can actually find the win condition that he needs.
And we're talking about Tendrils of Agony, right?
Well, the Tendrils of Agony, usually the Storm deck only plays 1 copy, and it's in his graveyard.
Okay.
So we'll be looking for Past in Flames to get a second shot at that Tendrils of Agony. Or he could go for an alternate win condition like Empty the Warrens, but he would really love to win the game without passing the turn if he can, since his life total is 4 against a mono-red deck. You'll note that he has Infernal Tutor, which can go for Past in Flames, but he can't empty his hand without a Lion's Eye Diamond. So he's looking for Past in Flames or Lion's Eye Diamond.
He's still digging.
There's the land drop for the turn.
So that puts him down to 3. I assume the prison deck doesn't care about Lightning Bolt here, especially in game number 2.
No, unfortunately for the mono-red prison deck, the heavy reliance on Chalice of the Void makes it a bit of a liability to play with 1-mana spells like Lightning Bolt, no matter how good they are.
So that's not going to be a thing.
It's actually down to 1 here from that Cataxian Probe.
Yikes.
And, man, he's going off, but he hasn't won the game
yet.
Like,
he hasn't actually won, Reed. Is anybody else starting to get a little nervous here that he's not going to be able to do it?
And if he has to pass the turn, he'll have a full hand. He'll have a lot to work with, but he will have to reset his mana and his storm count, so it's not what he wants to do.
Okay, well, let's just see what he does here, because now he's marching up the storm and mana count thanks to Dark Ritual, and another Dark Ritual to follow.
We might see him point some discard spells at himself in an attempt to empty his hand, or we might see him just empty the Warrens for a whole lot of tokens.
Now double Cabal Ritual follows up. So, as you said, Storm Count not a concern for him, and at this point, mana either. He's at 11 black mana
Black
floating.
mana at least. Colored
Right.
mana could still be a little bit of a concern.
Duress you or Duress me? All right, Duress you. That gets rid of Chandra.
Which is big because even if he puts 100,000 Goblin tokens into play, if Shota Takao draws a Simian Spirit Guide, he could deal the last 2 points of damage with the Chandra.
Of course. Now it's Cabal Therapy, naming Magus of the Moon. And there it is, empty the Warrens. What did that 18?
18 Storm Count makes through 36 Goblin tokens.
36 goblins. That is going to be a little difficult given that Shota Takao has nothing left in his hand but lands.
Man, I'm curious if Michael Reed could have emptied his hand to get past In Flames by pointing those discard spells at himself.
If it would have been just right.
Not to nitpick because his win condition was good enough, but you got to think about that corner case scenario where you pass a turn, your opponent draws off the top, goes, oh, all right, I'll lightning bolt you.
Interestingly, by the way, I'm assuming if you're Michael Reed, you're just holding your breath on turn one when you're on the draw, right? Like the Shota just doesn't go double mana producing, like what he did in game one.
If you're Michael Reed or if you're anyone playing against this mono red person.
Yeah. But he didn't. Shota goes land go.
Yeah, so
and Reed's like, oh, I get an opening. Oh, my man. Michael's deck is one of the most gorgeous things I've ever seen.
It's great, yeah.
By the way. We are now at Peak Island as well. So, Michael, props, man. That is a masterpiece of a deck you've put together. Now let's see if he can actually win with it. Got one more game to go to stay alive for top 8. Both of our players are 8-2. We're in day 2 of Legacy. I know you're used to joining us on our Saturday afternoon and saying, we're in the middle of day 1, right? No, we actually started yesterday. And we're going to be working our way up to the top 8 today and giving away a trophy. Tomorrow, we will be back, though, and we're going to be bringing you standard day 2. There is a standard GP happening in this room right now, by the way, alongside day 2 of Legacy. It's kind of cool. Oh, the good old-fashioned way, though. Chalice of the Void for 1, just playing a couple of mountains.
So
still good.
Here we see why Shota Takao kept his opening hand despite not having an explosive turn 1. One decision that's interesting to me is if perhaps it would have been better to cast the Chalice on 0 on turn 1 instead of casting it on 1 on turn 2. With the major concern there being that you do allow your opponent to cast at least 1.
Did I just miss something here?
We just have a Brainstorm resolving despite the Chalice of the Void on 1.
Why?
Because I suppose Shota Takao did not trigger the ability of his card. He didn't counter it. We saw Michael Reed casting spells into the Chalice in game 1, we believe to fill up his graveyard, but this is another side benefit of casting the spell. It is on your opponent to remember their own Chalice of the Void trigger.
Wow, he actually snuck a Brainstorm through a Chalice of the Void. Oh, man, that could really hurt Shota Takao's chances. I mean, we know how important card selection is in the format in general, but Storm, of all things, needs a very specific subset of cards. Is that an Infernal Tutor now for Michael?
So a big part of this Infernal Tutor is being able to shuffle after the Brainstorm resolve, so he's going to shuffle away a bad card. Brainstorm becomes even more powerful when there are cards like Chalice of the Void and Magus of the Moon on the battlefield, because those cards invalidate a lot of the spells in your own deck, so if you get to shuffle those away, cash them in for fresh looks at new cards, it is a big deal.
Michael Reed also astutely having 2 basics on the battlefield here against Magus of the Moon. Should mention that too. Michael's given himself a chance to still produce the colors of mana that he actually needs.
Yep, he did fetch that basic island on turn 1 with Flooded Strand.
Right, had the swamp in hand, but...
Okay, here we go. Cabal Ritual starts things off. That's 3 mana, putting a 5th card into the graveyard.
Another ritual. And there's a Lion's Eye Diamond to get the storm count up. 6 cards in the yard right now. Another Lion's Eye Diamond. Storm count goes higher. And can you explain what's happening here, Reed? Infernal Tutor on the stack, etc.
So
gets a little tricky.
Michael Reed is casting Infernal Tutor and responding to his own spell by sacrificing Lion's Eye Diamond, which does 2 things. It means he gets to float a whole lot of mana while he's resolving his Infernal Tutor, but it also means he gets to empty his hand, which the important clause on Infernal Tutor allows you to search for any card in your library if you have Hellbent. And I think a Past in Flames is going to be a deterministic kill here.
Wow. And he says, look what I can do. And of course, the way this works is they work their way right back up the chain, casting all of those rituals again, which gives them the necessary storm count. And then, of course, at the end of all of that, there's that Infernal Tutor to find the kill, and then they win the game.
Yep, this is a pattern that you see often in Vintage with Yawgmoth's Will rather than Past in Flames, but the same thing comes up in both Legacy and Modern Storm decks. Make a bunch of mana, cast a spell that gives all my spells flashback, make a bunch of mana, tutor for the win.
And that's what we see here. He's going to go find, ostensibly, a Tendrils of Agony. Yeah, he needed one more storm count, apparently, so he's going to chain an Infernal Tutor. That puts him at 10. And there's the Tendrils of Agony for storm count 11. Plenty enough to get Shota Takao dead, and that's going to do it. Michael Reed wins the match 2-1 over the mono-red Prison deck, and Michael still alive for top 8. Shota Takao, not. And really good run, though, for Shota as far as top 8 goes. But like I said before, it's not the end of the tournament for these players. It's just a lot of them, when they get to this point, are really starting to think about top 8 and trying to hold it together. And that's why we bring you MTG Red Zone. We're in Seattle for Legacy today. We'll be bringing you Standard tomorrow. For now, though, we've got a short commercial break. We'll see you right after that.